to Policing TV again, here with Mick Willing, amongst many things, former Deputy Commissioner of New South Wales Police. And in video one, we have talked about your police career with New South Wales Police. This second video, we're going to focus on current or broadly current matters that relate to your career since you left New South Wales Police, where Mick, as Deputy Commissioner, you'd thrown your hat in the ring for the Commissioner's post when it became vacant, but uh,
Mm.
on that occasion weren't successful in that. Um, you then decided that you would leave the job, hand in your warrant card. What were your thoughts and feelings around that time as you moved from being a serving police officer with, as in many parts of the world, sort of carrying a warrant card that gave you the
Mm.
powers of arrest to Civvy Street, if you like.
Yeah, look, it was a challenging time, Bernard. So, as you rightly say, I threw my hat in the ring to be the New South Wales Police Commissioner. A process was run towards the end of 2021. There were three of us interviewed finally for the position. I was the preferred applicant. The panel picked me as the preferred applicant. My name went up to government for sign off, literally as one premier resigned and another premier came in New South Wales, and after a period of time decided to go in a different direction and chose another one of my colleagues to be the New South Wales Police Commissioner. I knew at the time that that was going to be, challenging for both the new commissioner and myself, given the circumstances. And ultimately, the new commissioner, wanted to pick her team, and I wasn't going to be part of that team. So, I left the organisation with a heavy heart, to be honest. But and thought, okay, now what? Now what do I do? I knew I had a good CV, a great network, all those different things, and as police leaders do, different capabilities. But converting that into a second and third and fourth, whatever career was a challenge in itself. So I reached out to different people and engaged a very good sort of CEO transition coach to work with and sort of to really sort of hone in on what it was that I wanted to do. And a long story short, I was connected with a global consulting company, Accenture, a US-based company, but with 800,000 employees, but a large, I guess, practice in Australia and New Zealand, and they asked me to come in and establish a national security and public safety focused practice area. So, Accenture is a technological based company, consulting company. Many would suggest I'm a Luddite and I'm not very technologically proficient, but it was a completely different set of circumstances for me. So I felt that I had to sort of start from scratch again. I had the connections and that sort of stuff across the intelligence community and law enforcement, but, consulting and working in the private sector was something different. And I learned a hell of a lot. I stayed with Accenture for a couple of years. I was deeply missing purpose, the purpose that I had whilst in policing, even though I was working alongside police and intelligence officials. I missed it. During my time at Accenture, I became connected with Fortem Australia, with a role that an organisation that I currently lead. And I'll get to what that does in a second, but Fortem Australia had an advisory board. It was chaired by a good friend of mine, former Australian Federal Police Commissioner Andrew Colvin. And Andrew rang me and said, look, he needed to step aside from that role because of some work that he was doing in the private sector, which was conflicting with, some funding sources, and asked me whether I'd take over as the advisory board chair. And I did that. And Fortem Australia provides support to first responders and their families, mainly in the form of clinical or psychological support around wellbeing and resilience, also career management and social connection type activities. And for me, it was purpose, because I was sort of back dealing with things and dealing with people who I felt had similar experiences to what I was feeling, and that was that almost loss of identity, that sort of connection that was so deep in me from policing, and I was missing it terribly. And so, Fortem was a good way of sort of, I guess, scratching that itch in some ways by being connected and giving back to people who were across the entire emergency services and and volunteer community, who were out there doing an extraordinary job, being ordinary people. So I did that for a while, and ultimately I decided to leave Accenture for a couple of different reasons, and set up my own advisory company called the Peelian Group. And look, in the interest of time, I'll sort of truncate it. So the Peelian Group is a specialist advisory firm, basically myself, and I'm connected to a number of people in the public safety space around the world. But why the Peelian Group? I'm a big believer in the Peelian principles of policing, and it was something that I've always thought about, and the fact that policing, in my view, needs to be delivered, with the trust and legitimacy that the community gives it, and with community confidence. So I liked it, and so I kind of came up with the name, the Peelian Group, and whilst I use the Peelian Group to do bits and pieces of work and specialist advisory work in different areas. It's more fun for me, a bit of a hobby on the side in some ways at the moment.
So can I just come
Sorry.
in? Can I just come in for a moment here, Mick? Because so you've talked through. So you left New South Wales. You engaged um,
CEO
a,
transition
a,
coach.
a, a transition coach, and
Yeah,
they introduced you to Accenture, as I understand it. But
correct.
you've also talked about what appears to be a sort of sense of loss at that time,
Yep,
where you had that sense of purpose and you didn't quite have the sense of purpose uh, after that. Uh, Prior to us starting this recording, we also talked about your handing in your warrant card, and so what I'm interested in is, um, and I don't think this just applies. Can I put it this way to deputy commissioners? I suspect it's any of those who've been in a public service organisation for a long period of time, and then find either because the natural career path is that you leave after a certain number of years, but you are still very much capable of being economically active, if I can put it that way, capable of
yep.
contributing in some way, whether it be of public and private sector. So, what I'm just interested in at this stage is how did that time feel? What was it like to hand in your warrant card, and uh, where did you get support through that period?
Look, it was really tough, and I say that in a way that my and I mentioned it before. My identity was wrapped up in policing. I went from being standing there with the New South Wales Premier during COVID every day doing press conferences to being effectively unemployed. Um, and so for me, it was a huge loss. They talk about policing being a family, and it is. And so, being sort of on the outside of that was challenging for me. Yes, I had a warrant card, and I carried a warrant card for nearly 32 years, 31, 32 years, and one of the biggest challenges for me was I went into David Jones, a department store here in Sydney, and I had to buy a wallet again. And I was just because I carried my credit cards and all the things in my police badge, and it was bizarre. And I thought, wow, how is this? This is really challenging. It was really something so basic, but for me, it was such a change and such a tipping point. It was tough. It was tough emotionally. I got support from my family, of course, but I had a great, and still do have a great network of people around me, and they were great. And I think I had enormous personal support, just people who were there for me. And I was lucky with that, but at the same time too, I started to think, wow, okay, now what am I going to do? I've got two teenage daughters. How do I get them through school now? And all of those economic sort of pressures and things around uncertainty were playing out. And so, it, again, I reached out and got a CEO transition coach through a very good connection in the intelligence community, and that person was wonderful insofar as centering me and telling me to be patient and just sort of helping me work through how to convert my capabilities into something that the private sector or other sectors wanted. Um, I knew I could do the role. To be honest, I thought, that I had the capability of doing whatever I put my mind to. But settling on what to put my mind to was the challenge. So like, what next? And so,
Well, and
yeah, it was a challenge in
so
lots of
so
ways.
in terms of what next, you clearly haven't lost the urge to be a public servant, to give to society, because as we record this in August 2025, you've thrown your hat again into the ring for the vacancy that's come up for New South Wales Commissioner. Now,
Yeah,
we're
that's
not
right.
going to talk about that in detail because um, we may come back to that in a future conversation, but it's work in progress, and I don't really think we should get into that at this stage. But you have still
Mm,
that strong public service, public servant ethic, and want to
absolutely.
contribute to policing, whether it be through the work with the Peelian Group, whether it be with the work that you lead with Fortem, or indeed in other sorts of ways. So, as we come to the end of this second video that we're recording, we're going to come on to a third in a minute, looking at the future of policing and some of the challenges there are locally, nationally, internationally for policing, and opportunities as well. But
Yep.
at this point in your career, with that long record of public service and contribution to um, policing. What reflections do you have specifically looking back on that? Um,
You know,
I guess. Go on. So,
yeah, look, you're right. I have a deep sense of purpose. My identity is still, I'd say, wrapped up, not as much as it was in policing, but policing is who I am. I'm a police officer by trade, and a public servant more generally. Um, uh, yes, we can't sort of touch on detail too much, but yes, I did throw my hat in the ring again for New South Wales Police Commission because I felt compelled to. I had, a lot of people who were supporting and urging me to do it, but it was about purpose. It was about believing that I had something more to give in the policing arena, and I believe that strongly. Whether that's New South Wales, whether that's in some other form, in another role, I do believe I've got extensive experience, and I want to keep giving back. In an area that means the world to me, and that's policing, law enforcement, and public service. So, yeah, I think some people just have that innate thing inside them, and I'm certainly one of those people. I often joke too that when I grow up, I'll work out what I want to do. At this point, it's either continuing to be a public servant in some form or fashion, or serve in some way, or be a professional golf caddy. So at the moment, I don't think that there's any openings, with Rory McIlroy at the moment as a caddy. So I'm going to have to continue being looking at ways of serving the public, I think, moving
let's
forward.
okay. We'll pick up on the future in video three. I'm going to bring the second video though to a close. Mick Willing, again, thank you very much for joining us here on Policing TV. We're going to pick up on in a moment on video three, looking to the future. But for the time being, Mick Willing, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Bernard.